Volume 4 takes a deep and profound look at the Great Visionaries, where they were right, where they recognized how consciousness relates to, indeed manifests reality, and where they were wrong. Islam certainly has had a major impact on the entire world, but this last episode of Volume 4 presents serious, profound caveats to believing anything the Quran claims. The Essence of Reality explores how the psyche which you are creates the reality you encounter. Well, marhaban, you found the Essence of Reality with unique insights into human consciousness, how life actually works. The reality you experience flows in a way that neither religion nor science can recognize. Here you see just how you attract and create the real qualities of your life. No God or other source dictates your health, success, relationships. Only you. To gain awareness of that inner-outer connection and move your life in positive directions, stay tuned and check out other episodes. We have much to cover. This episode follows up on issue 4011, which exposed the basis of the Quran and Muhammad's message as coming from his own ideas, not from a creator deity, not delivered by an angel, as neither of those exist. Here I would look at three key elements that are absolutely necessary to understand if you would like to make sense out of Islam in the modern world, and the noted 5 pillars of Islam, the backbone of Muslim belief. I would first note a key observation often voiced here. Whatever you believe in seems to be true. The mind interprets reality in line with its held beliefs, such that they are always confirmed by experienced events. So it is for any staunch believers in religion, even in science. So it is for Islam. If you believe in the Quran, and especially have been indoctrinated in its content since childhood, it will seem definitive and true. In reality, it is neither. Before I proceed, though, please note, if you aren't open-minded enough to consider a rational argument and valid criticism about Islam, the Quran, and its originator, Muhammad, do indeed go watch some other video. What I have to say about your religion may not sit well with you. There it is. I explore reality here, how life actually works. In that process, I expose vague, unfounded fantasies wherever I find them. Islam declares repeatedly claims and threats that have no foundation in reality. That's not my fault. I'm just pointing it out. If you don't want to hear that, go elsewhere. Tom Nair here, as ever, exploring consciousness. Perspectives in EoR provide visual addition to my website, my books, and some 200 talks I've given to open-minded groups, sincerely seeking to understand life. Through a personal inner journey, I've come to see the oneness of things, an inner-outer connection of self with real events and relationships of daily life. Becoming aware of that connection, you can improve real life by finding and changing inner roots to outer problems. In the last episode, we looked at the archaic 7th century model for reality that the Quran reinforces. I concluded, as one must with any smidgen of reasoned thinking, that any real creator God would have actually known of planets, solar systems, and galaxies. If he actually existed and revealed truths to his attuned prophet, he wouldn't have echoed the common idea popular at the time, a flat, small earth and 7 heaven domes that supposedly spanned it, those supported by invisible pillars. But Muhammad, purposely or not, was making up his own revelations. For sure, the cosmology could only reflect current ideas, extremely primitive from our modern standpoint. Showing that deviation from reality, plus repeated references to imaginary jinn creatures, along with inaccurate references to biblical events, I concluded this. A document that supposedly originated with the Creator God deemed entirely true and infallible if shown to be false in even one indisputable way, was rendered invalid in its entirety by several demonstrable flaws. Of course, I detailed several blatant flaws and internal inconsistencies, plus unending yet unfounded declarations and petty warnings. Naskh, or abrogation. Let's look at 3 more elements of Islam that render it demonstrably false. First, Naskh, that is, abrogation. When Muhammad started claiming to reveal truths from Allah, living at first in Mecca, his directives and declarations were rather mild and amenable. If people don't go along with these ideas, he said, that's okay. Be friendly and don't argue. However, years later, when Muhammad had built up his army in Medina so he could force people to go along with his new religion, by this time the tone of his message was much more aggressive. If non-believers fight you, smite them wherever you find them, whack their heads off. That left a wide range of declarations delivered earlier with mild-mannered directives in conflict with later, more aggressive ones. What do you do about 2 verses that discuss the same topic but provide different commands, when both are supposed to emanate from the great God Allah and be followed? Long-standing Muslim solution. The later one abrogates the older one. It totally renders it null and void. That little technique, called Naskh in Arabic, or abrogation, has 2 distinct consequences of major importance. One is that much of the Quran, particularly the more friendly parts, are cancelled. Now, it's nearly impossible to tell which came first, as the Quran isn't chronological. And most Muslims don't analyze it. Like with Christians and the Bible, they pick out parts they like and ignore the rest. So that leaves peaceful people finding mild-mannered passages and aggressive people picking out the violent ones. Actually, the latter group, the hostile ones, are the more technically correct. And that leaves Islam even more aggressive and violent to outsiders than it otherwise would be. That's nasty, particularly in the hands of hard-headed fundamentalists like the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda. They are actually just following the Quran as it is written, with older, more accommodating verses crossed out, just as they're supposed to be. The second consequence of abrogation should be pretty obvious. If Allah is supposed to be all-knowing and all-seeing, why did he issue the faulty statements originally? Why did they have to be corrected? Did Allah screw up? Was he really not all-knowing and most brilliant? Did Gabriel confuse the directives on his way down to deliver them? Actually, the answer is obvious and simple. Allah doesn't exist, and like all gods, never did. Muhammad was spouting off his own revelations and realized later that stuff he'd said earlier wasn't what he wanted to have going down. My point, abrogation further confirms that the whole Quran is a concocted work by a man of limited vision. Argument by authority. That brings up an amusing point, the second clearly falsifying element made by Quran 1736, the surah called Night Journey, a comment about a technique called argument by authority. The Quran states something like this: "And do not pursue that of which you have no certain knowledge." This means to question things, other religions in this case, and don't just accept an explanation because some authoritative source states it. Do you see anything peculiar about that? Think about it. The directive to not accept an unfounded explanation. The whole Quran is put forth as an argument by authority. It is all based on self-claim that it comes from the great deity, Allah, and you'd better believe it. The whole book is founded on that literary fallacy, argument by authority. The whole religion. Yet its unquestionable verse suggests not to believe such an argument. This is reiterated in Surah 2, the cow. They have names for these surah, verse 111. By the way, which suggests that the listener say, produce your proof if you are truthful, to one who would claim validity, again, to some other religion. This, of course, when the Quran itself has no proof whatsoever of anything it declares as true or authoritative. It relies entirely on argument by authority, leaning heavily on the aggressive means of coercion and intimidation it has always used to spread its primitive ideas. Taqiyya, lying is okay. The third disqualifying aspect to Islam, a strange one indeed, is an ancient time-honored gesture called Taqiyya. The gist of it, going back to the very inception of Islam, is that a Muslim is allowed, even encouraged when defending the religion, to hedge, make up stuff, or blatantly lie. This started when different sects had to pretend they weren't who they were to avoid persecution by others. But Islamic standards have established that it's perfectly all right to simply lie about anything concerning Islam when a Muslim feels threatened or Islamic values are questioned. Of course, this happens in practically any discussion. I couldn't possibly overemphasize the importance of this. Anytime you would discuss serious topics with a Muslim, you should be aware that he or she very well could be flat out lying to you as a non-Muslim. This isn't a personal thing, like certain individuals by nature tend to twist the truth. This is practically a mandate that believers are obliged to defend the faith in front of outsiders. That, of course, has deeper ramifications. If the religion actually was presenting a valid description of reality, it wouldn't, first of all, have to spread it by force, and second, certainly wouldn't have to lie about its details and nature, would it? 5 Pillars of Islam. The religion of Muhammad rests in practice on what it calls the 5 pillars of Islam. Let's finish with a look at these cornerstone aspects of the religion and, as I do here, compare their claims and gestures to reality. Shia and Sunni branches, by the way, while they fight tooth and nail over many things, pretty much agree on these 5 elements. Number 1 is Shahada, a declaration of faith that there is only one God, Allah, and Muhammad was his messenger. Second is Salat, Islamic prayer. 5 daily prayers are normally offered, accompanied by bowing and rocking in predefined gesticulations, often at a mosque, certainly in the direction, wherever you are, of Mecca. Number 3 is charity, or zakat, an act of giving to the poor for all Muslims who are able to do so. The 4th pillar is fasting, Siyam they call it. This is particularly done during the month of Ramadan, where people don't eat anything from dawn until dusk. It's meant to elicit forgiveness from Allah while seeking nearness to their deity, plus show dependence and gratitude to Allah and atone for any sins. And pillar number 5 is Hajj, a pilgrimage to Mecca sometime during life, to be done during the designated month for such a thing. Various rituals, of course, need doing, including touching the black stone and walking 7 times around the Kaaba. Okay, the 5 pillars. What value might these have in real life? What might the individual gain or lose in carrying out the 5 key elements of Islam? The first pillar would be a resoundingly negative worth. Declaring faith in something that doesn't exist carries only self-defeating value as it's registered in the subconscious. Much like the negativity of prayer I pointed out in Volume 3. No God exists. On some level, we each recognize that. Pretending and reinforcing that fantasy in the subconscious can only foster inner conflict and result in problems within the self-image. Prayer 5 times a day, also a downer. Each reiteration of entreaty to a God who never was only reinforces powerlessness in the self. Charity, pillar 3, well, that's a good one there, helping the poor. Except that If a society could outgrow the plethora of negative programming that results from everybody hanging on to an imaginary God and endless rituals to appease him, there would be a lot less need for charity. Abundance eludes individuals who deem themselves powerless. Fourth, fasting. All the meaning attached to the gesture of fasting is artificial. Forgiveness from Allah, gratitude to the non-existent deity, submission, dependence on him, these are only negative gestures that continue to project power out to a fantasized deity. Fasting is a meaningless gesture, as empty as your stomach from dawn to dusk. Fifth, that pilgrimage to Mecca. Let me say that no place on Earth, or anywhere else in the solar system for that matter, is any more holy or inherently more spiritually meaningful than any other. Making a huge effort to get to Mecca, to walk laps with throngs of other dupes, carries no innate value whatsoever. The take on Islam. Well, there you have it. Of all the 50-some videos I've produced to this point, most topics have had a thread of insight into man's deeper psyche, a reference at least in passing to the oneness with which consciousness experiences its deeper self, woven into real events and relationships. Philosophers touched on that oneness. The likes of Plato, Heraclitus, Lao Tzu and Gautama, Meister Eckhart and Jesus, and many more modern visionaries could at least glimpse life's deeper truths. But here, in regarding Islam and the stream of unfounded declarations that constitutes Muhammad's words, there is no whimper of recognition of man's greater sense, of man's core being of consciousness. Mankind will be very well served when Islam, embodied in its Quran and peripheral traditions in the Hadith, are packed neatly onto a shelf in some museum, allowed to gather dust in a collection of worn-out ideas that lead only to repeated conflict and trouble. A key observation often voiced here: whatever you believe in seems to be true. If you believe in the Quran, and especially have been indoctrinated in its content since childhood, it will seem definitive and true. In reality, it is neither. Let's look at 3 more elements of Islam that render it demonstrably false. Abrogation. When Muhammad started claiming to reveal truths from Allah, living at first in Mecca, his directives and declarations were rather mild and amenable. However, years later, when Muhammad had built up his army in Medina, so he could force people to go along with his new religion, by this time the tone of his message was much more aggressive. That left a wide range of declarations in conflict with later, more aggressive ones. Long-standing Muslim solution. The later one abrogates the older one. It totally renders it null and void. Abrogation has 2 distinct consequences. One is that much of the Quran, particularly the more friendly parts, are cancelled. The second consequence of abrogation is, if Allah is supposed to be all-knowing and all-seeing, why did he issue the faulty statements originally? Actually, the answer is obvious and simple. Allah doesn't exist, and like all gods, never did. Muhammad was spouting off his own revelations. Argument by authority. The Quran states something like this: "And do not pursue that of which you have no certain knowledge." The whole book is founded on that literary fallacy, argument by authority. The whole religion. Yet its unquestionable verse suggests not to believe such an argument. The third disqualifying aspect to Islam is an ancient time-honored gesture called Taqiyya. A Muslim is allowed, even encouraged, when defending the religion, to hedge, to make up stuff, or blatantly lie. If the religion actually was presenting a valid description of reality, it wouldn't, first of all, have to spread it by force, and second, certainly wouldn't have to lie about its details and nature. Number one is Shahada, a declaration of faith that there is only one God, Allah, and Muhammad was his messenger. Declaring faith in something that doesn't exist carries only self-defeating value as it's registered in the subconscious. Second is Salat, Islamic prayer. Each reiteration of entreaty or submission to a God who never was reinforces powerlessness in the self. Number three is charity, or zakat. If a society could outgrow the plethora of negative programming that results from everybody hanging on to an imaginary God and endless rituals to appease him, there would be a lot less need for charity. The fourth pillar is fasting, Siyam. Fasting is a meaningless gesture, as empty as your stomach from dawn till dusk. And pillar number five is Hajj, a pilgrimage to Mecca. No place on earth or anywhere else in the solar system is any more holy or sacred or inherently more spiritually meaningful than any other. Of all the 50-some videos I've produced to this point, most topics have had a thread of insight into man's deeper psyche, a reference at least in passing to the oneness with which consciousness experiences its deeper self, woven into real events and relationships. Philosophers touched on that oneness, the likes of Plato, Heraclitus, Lao Tzu and Gautama, Meister Eckhart and Jesus, and many more modern visionaries could at least glimpse life's deeper truths. But here, in regarding Islam and the stream of unfounded declarations that constitutes Muhammad's words, there is no whimper of recognition of man's greater sense, of man's core being of consciousness.